U.S. can keep and extend its military superiority despite tighter budgets and the wear and tear of 13 years of war.
B-1 and B-52 long-range bombers extended their reach from the British base at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean.
Calls it an indispensable platform for policing the world.
Our whole outlook is, as you know, is with the Atlantic and the Pacific in the center. But what I'm here to say tonight is we have to focus on a third ocean, the Indian Ocean, which has been consigned to the edges of our consciousness, but which is rising in importance. Another thing.
According to the report of CSBA entitled Sustaining America's Strategic Advantage in Long-Range Strike, U.S. should be more strategic. The main concept is formulated headed by Mark Gunzinger. He is a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments CSBA. Gunzinger most recently served as a senior advisor to the Air Force for the 2010 Quadrennial Defense Review QDR. He previously served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Forces Transformation and Resources. Gunzinger has been a key player in every major U.S. defense review since the end of the Cold War. He supported the Air Force Secretary during the 1993 Bottom-Up Review Commission on Roles and Missions, and the 2001 QDR. He is the principal author or co-author of multiple defense planning guidances for development of the force directives, the key strategic planning guidance documents that shape DoD force planning. So the CSBA report is more than a think tank activity.
In the report, CSBA claimed that although useful for giving DoD a post-Cold War organizing principle, the Iraq and North Korea scenarios distorted the relative importance of short versus long-range striking capability. Neither state is particularly large geographically, thereby allowing short-range aircraft to cover a large percentage of their territory. Putative Iran or China scenarios, on the other hand, involve operating areas with much greater depth, requiring longer-range capabilities to strike targets. The need for persistence over geographically distant target areas only increases this requirement. Possible future operations might see U.S. strike aircraft operating across much greater distances than has been the case in recent conflicts.
The report includes, the distance from Guam S. Anderson Air Force Base to Beijing is approximately 2,200 nautical miles, and the Delingha ballistic missile fields in central China are 700 nautical miles further. In the Persian Gulf, to reach Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities at Natanz, U.S. long-range aircraft staging out of Diego Garcia would have to travel 2,700 nm directly, and potentially much greater distances to allow for threat avoidance maneuvers and flight routes needed to approach potential targets from various axes of attack.
So, CSBA's solution is, while future land-based aircraft will have their range requirement defined by the need to strike targets at extremely long distances, the range needed by future sea-based strike aircraft will be defined more by threats to a carrier as freedom of maneuver and the physical constraints of operating from a carrier deck. Carrier operations within a zone stretching out anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 nautical miles from the coast of mainland China. A carrier-based aircraft with a combat radius of approximately 1,500 nautical miles capable of aerial refueling would allow U.S. aircraft carriers to contribute long-range strike capacity to an air-sea battle campaign from the outset of a conflict while remaining outside the range. Conveniently, a combat radius of 1,500 nautical miles from a point of last refueling 250 nautical miles offshore would allow such an aircraft to cover any target in Iran, or persist over target areas to search for mobile threats at ranges less than 1,500 nautical miles. And so the Bay of Bengal is a vital point for U.S. future strategy. Not only the CSBA, but also other think tanks of USA claimed the strategy fruitful to pivot Asia.
You were one of the folks who was intimately involved in the American refocus on Asia. It's a centerpiece of America's strategy in the region to rebuild links with allies in the region who are afraid of China, while at the same time dealing without turning China into an enemy?
I think it's on the right track. This is a president who came into office convinced that we had underinvested in the Asia Pacific, and there was some element of strategic distraction associated with our involvement in the Middle East over the last 10 or so years. And so he came into office convinced we needed to invest, and he did. But my line to people is, look, the rebalance is a decade-plus long strategy. So, you know, it's all about baby steps year after year after year. And we'll look back 10 years from now, 15 years from now, and I think we need to reserve judgment until then.
And the Chinese are playing into it because they're getting more aggressive, and even countries that would be inclined to be pro-China, like Malaysia or even Indonesia, are turning toward the United States.
That's the issue.
But the strategy of air-sea battle has been criticized by some U.S. specialists. So, CSBA and Pentagon take a stand and argued that it's not about any war. It's only about a future strategy.
I wasn't talking about fighting a war with China. I'm talking about an American way of war, where we are used to responding to a threat from the United States with mass forces and building up a decisive force in theater and bases that are on the borders of our enemy. So what we're trying to do is assess new operational concepts, or how we might operate differently to Judah throw those capabilities that are emerging in the Middle East, in the Western Pacific, and other areas of the world. It's not about fighting a war with China.
I'll fight for your right to do that.
Yes.
Okay.
That's precisely what folks.
But we're not talking about New Zealand or Estonia. And
right.
in your document, which is I think everybody should read, it's very, very clear that.
Well, what is this document? We haven't introduced it.
Yes, it's Air-Sea Battle. We published that in 2010, and the intent of that was to provide intellectual fodder for the development of the official air-sea battle.
In fact, in those 4 years, then, there's been a tremendous development in precision weaponry, hasn't it?
But the air-sea battle plan is aimed at basically China, maybe also Iran. And the Pentagon originally was quite clear about that. Then it turned out to be somewhat problematic because it agitates China and leads them to counter-moves. So the Pentagon, to quote T.X. Hammonds from the National Defense University, decided to walk back the concept. So we may end up fooling the American people. The Chinese will not be fooled. This build-up...
Do you have lines into the Chinese thinking? I am incapable of really in any way understanding China.
Well, let me pull out a thread on something you said. And you said it's focused on China. Well, maybe Iran. We published another document called Outside In, completely focused on the Persian Gulf and how we could counter the kinds of capabilities that we see Iran investing in to constrain freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, to possibly coerce its nearby, to equip proxies that are now in Syria and Lebanese Hezbollah and in other areas. What is it that we need to do to be able to secure, stabilize that region and support our allies and friends in the region?
But China is
it is air-sea battle, but it's focused on another region, and we didn't call it air-sea battle because it's not all about the air and sea.